So we've already examined functionalism, and as you know, functionalists take a positive view of family life. We are now going to look at some more negative views of the family. We're going to look at radical psychiatry and Marxism. Just for your information, radical psychiatry is not needed for the exam, but you could use radical psychiatry to evaluate and criticise a functionalist question. So those who take a negative view argue that the family is a source of tension and conflict. It exploits or uses women and children. It's too inward looking. It doesn't look at wider society. It focuses on itself, and it is also a violent institution. So as I said before, we're looking at Marxists and we're also looking at radical psychiatrists. The focus is really on Marxists, but you can use radical psychiatrists to criticise functionalism. So radical psychiatrists then, they focus on the dysfunctions of the family. They look at the dark side of family life. They examine conflict and violence in the family and abuse within the family. Even Vogel and Bell, who were actually functionalists, recognised that the family isn't always positive and that it can have dysfunctions. They say children are used by parents as emotional scapegoats or punch bags for their everyday stress. R.D. Laing saw the family as a key source of madness, especially schizophrenia. He saw family life as a tangled web of conflict and tensions. He argued that tensions can pull children apart, resulting in breakdowns and psychiatric problems. So children were really picking up on their parents' stress. And the stress and anxiety in the family could cause schizophrenia. As you can see, this is quite an exaggerated view of the family. Edmund Leach is another radical psychiatrist. He called the family a chicken coop and an overloaded electrical circuit waiting to blow a fuse. He said it was a claustrophobic institution where parents fight and children rebel. And again, it is very inward looking. There's no way out. His main argument that the family had become too privatised and isolated in our nuclear family settings, and this was causing too much pressure on relationships. So what we mean by that is that the family looks inward on itself because the family spends a long time in the house together, and then this can create tension. So now we're moving on to David Cooper. Whilst David Cooper can fit into radical psychiatry, he's also a Marxist. So if you do get a question on Marxism, you can include David Cooper. So he argues that a family is a dangerous socialising agency producing obedient citizens. Now you need to know a little bit about Marxism to understand that. So basically, Marxism sees obedience as a bad thing because Marxists see capitalism as negative. And in a capitalist society, he argues society is based around the working class making little money and the upper class making a lot of money. And the working class are used by the upper class because it's the working class that produce profits. And for this to carry on and for the upper class to profit, people need to be obedient because they need to work for low pay, accept their poor pay, and carry on being good workers. So Cooper argued, rather than the family socialising you into shared norms and values, the family actually creates obedient citizens ready for the workforce. So his argument is about how the family keeps the capitalist system going through blind obedience to authority figures. He also sees the family as stifling the self, getting rid of creativity, making everybody the same, getting rid of individuality, and stopping children be free. And the family are controlled in many ways in a family. For example, children make very little choices about what they do, how they spend their leisure time, what time they go to bed, etc., etc. Obviously, there are criticisms with radical psychiatry, mainly that it totally ignores any harmonious aspects of family life. So to understand Marxist theory of the family fully, we first need a little background in Marxist theory in general. Marxists see capitalist society as based on an unequal conflict between two social classes. The capitalist class, or the upper class, who own the means of production, that is the factories and the way things are produced, such as resources, and the working class, whose labour the capitalists exploit for profit. So, for example, you can't make products without labour, and the working class, instead of receiving a reasonable wage and part of the profit, they receive minimum wage, which is very little to live on. So Marxists see all society's institutions, such as education, the media, the religion, and the family, as helping to maintain this class inequality and to maintain the capitalist society where the rich profit from working class labour. So the working class work, they create the profit, but it's the upper class who take all the profit for themselves. So for Marxists, all the functions of the family are performed purely for the benefit of the capitalist system. This is clearly very different to the functionist view, who argues that the family benefits society in general. So, the first function then the family provides is the inheritance of property. Marx argued at the start of human development, we lived in a stage of primitive communism. Property was owned collectively. Everybody shared it, and there was no private family. This was an era or a time of sexual freedom and promiscuity. Engels called it the promiscuous horde. So it was basically a tribe who would have sex with anyone. There were no rules limiting sexual relationships. It was pretty much a free-for-all. Society itself was the family. However, over time, some groups took over the means of production, the way things are produced. And along came private property. People started to produce goods for themselves and gain money from those goods. And it became difficult to carry on in the way that society had been with the promiscuous horde. So what did we need? We needed a monogamous family to pass down the private property that people had been able to produce. There had to be an easy way to hand down property through the family line. And this is why the nuclear family developed over time. So the man could pass on the money to his male heir. So this led and finally brought about the patriarchal, monogamous nuclear family. Monogamy, which is basically having one sexual partner, was essential because of the inheritance of private property. Men had to be certain of the paternity of their children in order to ensure that they were legitimate heirs and that they could pass the money on to their own children. According to Engels, then, it was this patriarchal family that led to women's inequality, because women became weaker than men and dependent upon men when the patriarchal monogamous family was created. Marxists argue that in a communist society where everybody was equal, there would be no patriarchal control, because there would be no need for a patriarchal family, since there would be no need to pass on private property through the generations. So the second main function of the family is ideological functions. Marxists argue that the family today performs ideological functions for capitalism. So ideology will be a new term to you. It means a set of ideas or beliefs which justify inequality and maintain the capitalist system. So it keeps the capitalist system going. Because people could question the capitalist system. So we need to make sure that everybody understands the way society works and agrees with how society works by basically brainwashing them. And Marxists argue that people are brainwashed to accept inequality in a capitalist society through the family. So how does the family do this then? Children are taught how to submit in society. It socialises children into the idea that hierarchy and inequality are inevitable, they're going to happen. Parental power over women, over children, gets them used to that idea that there's always going to be somebody in charge, usually the man, and it also prepares them for working life. That is why roles within the family are constricting. They constrict the child and confine behaviour. The self, the individual, creativity, that cannot be developed in the family because we're preparing children for life in capitalist society. So according to David Cooper then, the family prepares individuals to play the role of the endlessly obedient citizen. For capitalist society to work properly, children will need to obey eventually at school and in the workplace. They should not question inequality, because if they question inequality, then capitalism will not work for the upper classes anymore. So Zaretsky argues that family life creates the illusion that family is separate to capitalism, when in actual fact it's not. We put family life on a pedestal because it provides comfort from stress of work. The family, in functionalist terms, supposedly is a haven in a heartless world. It provides us a haven from the harsh world of capitalism outside, where workers can be themselves and have a private life. However, this apparent haven is just an illusion. The family can't meet its members' needs. For example, it's often based on the domestic servitude of women being subordinate to the man and providing all of the domestic roles. And women in particular provide a function for the capitalist society by reproducing future generations of workers. If it wasn't for women, there would be no workers to provide profit in the future. And finally, the last function is that family is a unit of consumption which helps to support capitalism. So the family provides workers for the capitalist society. And in that way, the upper class make a lot of money out of the workers because it is the workers that produce the profit. But the family also makes money for the capitalist system in another way, because the family consume a lot of goods. And that means that the family spends a lot of money within the capitalist system, and therefore in this way it also creates profit for the upper classes. And there's plenty of evidence that this is the case. Advertisers urge families to keep up with the Joneses by consuming all the latest products. The media target children who use pester power to persuade parents to spend more. And children who lack the latest clothes or must have gadgets are mocked and stigmatized by their peers. So Marxists argue that there's lots of functions that carry on and maintain the capitalist society. These functions benefit the capitalist system, but they do not benefit members of the family. And in this way, Marxism is in direct opposition to functionalism. So next lesson we'll be looking at some of the Marxist viewpoints, and we will also be making some comparisons to functionalism.